My name is Ava Jones, the Communications Specialist for the College of Information, and I just want to welcome everyone to this afternoon's Discovery Series. Just a little bit about the Discovery Series and how it began. Was the idea of having and inviting prominent and impactful speakers from the industries, academia, and nonprofits to stimulate the exchange of ideas at the intersection of the College of Information Science, Linguistics, and Learning Technologies. So the Discovery Series take place all year round. We are so excited to have Dr. Richard Wolf with us today. Dr. Salaf Munshi, if you could please introduce your guest lecturer for this afternoon.
Thank you very much, everybody. And I would like to welcome and thank Dr. Richard Wolf, our guest for today's presentation. And Dr. Wolf is a professor of music and South Asian studies at Harvard University, who conducts ethnomusicological field research on the musical traditions, languages, and cultures of South, Central, and West Asia. He has been conducting ethnomusicological research in India, Pakistan, Tajikistan, Afghanistan, Iran, Uzbekistan, the Kyrgyz Republic, and China for a total of about 9 years. His interdisciplinary work has focused on the questions of style, emotion, poetics, and the phenomenology of actions in space and time. As a music analyst and performer, Wolf is interested in aspects of improvisation, musical coordination and interaction, rhythmic elasticity, ornamentation, and the role of verbal texts as resources for music making. His research languages are Tamil, Kota, Urdu, Hindi, Persian, Tajiki or Dari, and Wahi. That's really a whole range of languages, and which we are also here at UNT, like we've been working on languages of South Asia. So it's really a great pleasure to have you join us and give us a presentation today. So welcome and thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Sadaf, and I'm really grateful to all the people who made this possible at UNT and the Discovery Series. This is a new experience, giving a lecture on Zoom, and I really look forward to talking to all of you after it's over. So I will share my screen now, and once I get the message that everybody sees everything clearly, then I'll begin the talk.
Thank you. This is new experience for me, to us as well, and this is my first ever Zoom presentation and hosting, so I guess we'll be fine.
Okay, so you see the screen fine now?
I see it.
Okay, so I'll get started.
Yes.
Okay. In many parts of the world, poetry is linked so integrally to music that they form a nearly inseparable unit. Words and music bind, limit, and provide space for one another. Musical considerations often clarify the metric organization of poetry that has no regular pattern in terms of syllable count or quantity. What Mary Boyce called the cultivated, imaginative, and evocative sung poetry of pre-Islamic Persia was, in her view, based on the musical placement of stresses. Ehsan Yalshoter made a similar point, extending it to much modern Iranian folk poetry as well. John Marr and Lynn Eight have analyzed Tamil poetry of the early medieval periods along the same lines, writing that syllable groupings do not always conform to the poetic feet of Tamil and Sanskrit classical meters, but are rather arranged according to the way they must have been sung. In many ways, classical Tamil poetic texts are not just musical, but themselves constitute forms of music. Grammars such as Gunasahar's commentary on Amida Sahar's 10th century work, Verses on the Precious Jewel Prosody, employ specific terms for rhythmic feel and intonation in their analyses of prosody. These terms are often compounds that include the Tamil term generally used for music, isai. Although since poetry and music are mutually constitutive here, it would be equally problematic to define isai simply as music. The recourse of grammarians to isai and related terms speaks to the lack of clear boundary between text and musical sound in Tamil poetry of this period. In both the Iranian-speaking and Tamil lands then, music and poetry have been linked deeply, both in concept and performance. The idea of poetry as an object separated from music, on the other hand, is probably a modern one. But the idea of what I'll call here the poem song, poetry and music as an integrated unit, has by no means disappeared. In this presentation, I'll analyze the poem song in two regions in which I've worked extensively. The Wakhan, located at the juncture of Kashmir and Central Asia, where most of the world's 80,000 Wakhi speakers live, and the Nilgiri Hills of South India, where fewer than 2,000 speakers of the Dravidian Kota language live. I'd like to consider the poem song in the context of endangered languages and ask in what ways the singing of poetry and composition of sung poetry might contribute to the vitality of languages under threat. When Vivek Virani first asked me to speak at this symposium, I thought back to my life-changing drive in 1997. From Lahore up the Karakoram Highway, through what was then called the northern areas of Pakistan, over the Punjab Pass, and into Xinjiang, China. The northern areas, now called Gilgit-Baltistan, are part of Pakistan-controlled Kashmir and host a variety of regionally unique languages and musical traditions. Note the proximity of the Wakhan to Gilgit-Baltistan and Xinjiang. My brief experiences with musicians in Gilgit-Baltistan and Xinjiang in 1997 played a long-term role in my writing and teaching, and ultimately led me to study Wakhi poetry and music. The asterisks on the map show two Wakhi villages, Vrang in Tajikistan and Yur in Afghanistan. These are the homes of the two Wakhi poets whom I'm documenting in a film entitled Two Poets and a River. This Google Earth map shows Yur village in relation to the Karakoram mountain range, Jammu and Kashmir, and Lahore, Pakistan. North of Lahore, about two-thirds map distance, is not able to get my cursor where it needs to be. Okay. North of Lahore, about two-thirds map distance toward Yur. So here's Yur, here's Lahore. You'll find the Shina-speaking town of Chilas. I stopped there to record some musicians in July of that summer in 1997. And here's where we get to listen to a little bit of the song. The pentatonic melody and rhythmic patterning of the song are typical of much music in this region. stretching east to Ladakh in India and north to the Pamiri part of Xinjiang, China. But the melody is markedly different from those in neighboring parts of Afghanistan and Tajikistan. I mention this because the spheres of musical influence here are somewhat independent of language, and this has implications for the poem song as it moves and is recreated. When Wakhis migrated in waves to southwest Xinjiang and northern Pakistan in the 19th century, they took up the musical styles of their multilingual neighbors. Wakhis of Gilgit-Baltistan sometimes describe the melodies of their newly composed sung poetry in terms of the language in which they think the song was originally sung, as if the language sticks to the music. This popular dance tune, for instance, is said to be derived from a Shina song. If we move northwest into the heartland of Afghan Wakhan, we find distinctly different kinds of melodies, many of them consisting of filigree patterns around a few main tones, as in this dance session in Ur. This is the kind of music and dancing found at Afghan Wakhi weddings. The music in this region, including this dance tune, is limited to a small number of tune types and rhythmic grooves, some of which are shared with Dari-speaking parts of Afghanistan. While poetry and music are deeply integrated in this region, melodies can nevertheless be detached from the particulars of a song and played alone or used for other poems. So the integration of poetry with singing is not necessarily dependent upon a particular melody. Poet-singers, and singers in general, may express themselves according to their choices of musical settings based on their personal moods and the musical and social contexts in which a particular text comes to mind. This doesn't seem to be the case for the early medieval Tamil texts discussed in the verses on the precious jewel Prosody, where the musical characteristics are intrinsic to the text, even if they are analyzed as if they have a life of their own. In the repertoires I work with, however, particular texts and melodies together compose well-defined genres or distinct pieces within those genres. This seems particularly to be true with songs of loss or sorrow, such as the Arto in Kota and the Bulbulik in Wakhi, both of which I'll consider below in relation to emotion and creativity. I began documenting the music, language and rituals of the Kotas as part of my doctoral research from 1990 to 1992, and have been returning to Kota villages regularly since then. I studied the language through recording songs and stories and transcribing them with my Kota research assistant, along with consulting the rather technical grammatical writings of Murray Emino and corresponding with the man himself. After my 1997 trip through northern Pakistan, I thought to study Wakhi language and music initially as a solution to a practical problem. I'd been learning Persian for some years and decided in 2011 to take up a project that would allow me to engage in language learning and music making in a Persian-speaking place. I was eligible for a single research fellowship to go to the only viable such place at the time, Tajikistan. That Fulbright South and Central Asia research grant required a project in 2 or more countries. As a South Asianist, I was eager to explore the South and Central Asian borderlands, but I also needed a specific intellectual justification for working across national borders. I framed my project around modern Wakhi sung poetry in Tajikistan and Pakistan, and the resources the dominant linguistic and musical environment provided to poets. I was reminded of my Kota research when I started learning Wakhi, for in both cases, I was accessing the language and culture of the linguistic minority via a local vehicular language, Tajik in the case of Wakhi and Tamil in the case of Kota. In both cases, the minority language was related to the vehicular language, leading me to recognize cognates and grammatical constructions, as well as to note important divergences between the cognate languages. The linguistic contexts of the 2 projects are nevertheless very different. Wakhi is an Eastern Iranian language that developed independently from the language that further to the west became modern Persian. Some 2,000 to 3,000 years would have passed before modern Persian spread eastward, reaching the region of today's Tajikistan in the 8th century CE. It probably took more time for the form of Persian now called Tajik in Tajikistan and Dari in Afghanistan to make inroads into the mountains where Wakhis live. Over the centuries, Persian speakers from further west, i.e. modern-day Iran, settled in relatively small numbers in the Wakhan. Their descendants continue to live in Tajik-speaking villages of Wakhan in Tajikistan today. Later, national projects led to the teaching of Tajik and Dari in Tajik and Afghan schools. Despite the relatively modern advent of spoken Persian in the region, Ismaili Muslims of the Pamirs and Badakhshan have been using Persian language poetry as part of their religious practice for at least a millennium. Kota emerged as an independent language no later than about 2,000 years ago, when Tamil and Malayalam became separate languages. Historical linguists attest to this using the so-called palatalization rule, in which Proto-Dravidian K becomes cha or sa before front vowels, with some exceptions. Kota preserves the velar K from Proto-Dravidian. While with Wakhi, it seems clear that significant geographic isolation accounts for the independent development of Wakhi from Persian until the 8th century, no such clarity exists regarding the development of Kota. Kota is spoken right along the boundaries of modern Tamil Nadu and Kerala. The Nilgiri mountain range is not vast, covering about 1,000 square miles. Compare this to the Gorno-Badakhshan Autonomous Region in Tajikistan at about 25,000 square miles, and Badakhshan, Afghanistan at about 17,000 square miles. The mountain peaks of the Nilgiris are in the 7,000 to 8,000 foot range and are lower than even the valleys in Wakhan, some of which are as high as 11,000 feet. Some degree of isolation, social if not also geographic, allowed the Nilgiri languages to develop, but this was happening in an environment in which at least some members of the communities were conversant in several Dravidian languages of the region. Wakhi and Kota, like all languages, include many borrowed words and constructions, the foreignness of which not all speakers are aware. The thorough interpenetration of Persian and Tamil into each language respectively, and the further embedding of the words those languages had already incorporated from Arabic, Sanskrit, and other languages make for a complicated linguistic picture with many openings for creative etymology. One of my favorites surrounds a word that has made its way to both Wakhi and Kota, the Arabic word ma'mul, which means roughly customary. While Wakhi speakers would probably recognize the term as Persian or Arabic, Kotas generally see it as indigenous. Ironically so, for mamul is the word for traditional or old way. The folk etymology of mamul is ma, from a Tamilization of the Sanskrit maha, meaning great, plus the Kota word mul, meaning direction. This yields old way or great tradition, if you will. To distinguish modern innovation from the ways of the ancestors, Kota substituted ma with the term wos, meaning new. This yields wosmul, new way, a modern innovation. The mixed vocabularies of each language, along with exposure to popular and literary traditions of the dominant language in each case, have opened up avenues for new forms of verbal composition that transcend the boundaries of any one language. Is everything coming through clearly? Can you hear me? Okay. Supporting the vitality of language, endangered or not, need not mean purging it of foreign influences, despite the various attempts of ideologically driven political movements to do just that. Some of the most influential composers in Kota and Wakhi over the course of the 20th century have experienced some form of separation from their homelands. This has, I think, given them perspectives and data from outside their village frames of reference to expand the linguistic and musical possibilities of their own languages. Among the Kotas, an introverted, imaginative man named A.K. Rangan created a new style of Kota composition that is very much alive today. He used popular tunes from Tamil films and the like, which were melodically more complicated and wide in tessitura or range than the mamul genres, such as devotional songs and arkus. His compositions harken back to film songs from the 1940s onwards, but by the time I met him in 1990, he no longer sang or remembered any of his songs. From a young age, having fallen victim to the quarrel between the mamul faction and the wosmul faction of the village, he was outcasted. After spending years wandering penniless through the cities and towns of the Indian plains, he eventually served in the army in far northeast India. As far as I know, no recordings of A.K. Rangan exist other than one I made a few years before he died. It will give you an idea of the sound of Kota speech, shot through as it is with many consonant clusters.
Alkan duda duda anje 6 ವರ್ಷ ಮಾಯ್ತು alkai ನೀವು ಏನು ಮಂಡನಕ್ಕೆ ರಾಪಿಸ್ಕೊ ಅಲ್ಲಿ ಕೊಟ್ವಿ ಕೂಡ ಕೊಟ್ಟಿದ್ಮೇಲೆ ನರಮಂಡಲು ಕೊಂಚ ನೀರು ಕೂಡ ಮೈಂಡ್ರು ಕೂಡ ಅದಕ್ಕೆ ಇನ್ನು ಕೆರಾಪಿಸಿದ್ಮೇಲೆ ಬಿಟ್ಟು ಅವು ಕೋಕಾಲಿ ಜನ್ಮಲು ಅಡ್ಡಿ ಅಡ್ಡಿ ಕೊಟ್ಟು ಕೋನಟ್ಟ ಒಂದು ಹಾಕಲಿ ಕಿರಿಸ್ತು ಒಂದು ಹಾಕಲಿ ಕೆರಾಪಿಸ್ಕೊಡು ಸರಿಯಾದ ಹೋರಾಟ ಅದಾಯಿನೇ ಯಾವತ್ತರ ಅದು ನಾಲ್ಕೈ
The song of his, I'll now play, differs from most traditional Kota songs in terms of its wide melodic range and its seemingly constant shifts in meter and rhythmic pattern. I suspect it was modeled on a film song and made its own rhythmic and metrical sense in its original scored version. Like many of Rangan's songs, it's difficult to sing and comes off as rhythmically and melodically wandering. Rangan would himself complain that his songs were being sung incorrectly, but he could not remember the originals and had not written them down. So this leaves us in doubt about the orderliness of the original text and the musical parts of these influential compositions, if a stable original ever did exist.
Heridi detigile niyum nadudu tetigile Heridi detigile niyum nadudu getigile Yenalin loipidala reda Aduda duipida dichimnedina Yenalin loipidala reda Aduda duipida dichimnedina எருதுத திகிலே நீயும் நடுதுக திகிலே ஆனே அன்றிருளே நைலில் குய்கேன் திகில வெளுப்புலான யாரே வது மேலாகாதா ಅಲ್ಲೇ ನೀಯೇ ಮಂಜುಳು ಕುಕ್ಕಿಟೆ ಅವನೆನತಕ ಸೇತಿಟ ತಡಿಯೇ ಅಲ್ಲೇ ನೀಯೇ ಮಂಜುಳು ಕುಕ್ಕಿಟೆ ಅವನೆನತಕ ಸೇತಿಟ ತಡಿಯೇ ಎರಿದಿದ್ದ ತಿಗಿಲೆ ನೀயும் ನಡುದುಗ ತಿಗಿಲೆ ಏನಾಳಿಲ್ ನೊಯ್ಪಿದಾಳರೇದ அடுதாதுய்ப்பித திசுமினி தினா என்னை கஞ்சிட்டு நீ அலாத சீமி குய்ப்பியோ பணமில்லாது நுண்ணுச்சுட்டு நீ பரிதேச அடிப்பியோ கவ்வில்லாத கணுமுக பெருப்பே அடுதாதுய்ப்பித திசுமினி தினா கவ்வில்லாத கணுமுக பெருப்பே அடுதாதுய்ப்பித திசுமினி தினா எருதுத திகிலே நீயும் நடுதுக திகிலே ஏனாளில் நொய்ப்பிதாளரேதா அடுதாதுய்ப்பித திசுமினி தினா.
A wife asks the moon where her husband has disappeared to. She alludes to a tryst when the moon hid in the mist so she could meet her lover under the cloud of darkness. Ar means not only husband, but any classificatory affine in the same generation as a Kota woman. That is, a Kota man with whom romantic relations would not be incestual. So the lover is the Arn, but perhaps they haven't been married. The boy lover ran off in fear of the girl's father, perhaps because as a husband, he wouldn't have had the money to support her. The feeling of alienation probably resonated with Rungan's own experiences as an outcast from the village for many years. In terms of prosody, certain features found here are common to all Kota songs. For instance, the phonemic distinction between long and short syllables is maintained rigorously, and consonant clusters are broken up a little bit by extending the release of each. For example, yeridida and ardidida for eridida and ardidida. Respectively, is how they'd be spoken. More distinctive to modern Kota poetry, and likely borrowed from Tamil, is the use of rhythmically striking alliteration, consonants, and assonants to form internal rhymes and other parallelisms, and these parallelisms serve poetic functions. In the refrain, for example, the shining of the moon is poetically linked to the telling of the moon, yeridida to ardidida, and the husband, his route, and his not telling are all brought into poetic equation through the use of long ah vowels, yanarn, ararde, and ardadad. Notably missing is any kind of poetic meter. Rather, the tune holds the text together and creates line breaks. A tune functions similarly in the artu, or song of grief, but the singer has a great deal of latitude in how to fit the text to tune, and even in the choice of words to convey a general meaning. The verb for rendering a tune vocally or instrumentally, it, is also used for picking up and carrying, putting hands together in salutation, building a house, and other purposes. Rendering is an on-the-spot negotiation between, in this case, the singer's mental image of a story and the textual and melodic mold of an octal. The octal employs stereotypical forms of address and often refers to the deceased as one who didn't heed sensible advice. The causes of death are generally inferred, not told, the sorcery of a neighboring tribe being the proximate cause, perhaps brought into actuality by a wild animal or illness. The song may be as short as about a minute or as long as 10 or 15. Longer songs will likely narrate a series of place names and events that track the path of the subject as they meet their fate. Artals are not technically laments, but are rather composed songs, which are sometimes inspired by funeral lamentation, which Kotas call simply crying. Artles have no ritual context. They are sung for entertainment, to pass the time, and privately. The singer may, in singing, both evoke and pacify her own pain and fear. In the Nilgiris this past December, I quickly surveyed Kota singing practices with an eye toward changes over the last 30 years. What songs, if any, were being forgotten? Was anyone composing new songs? The short answer is that they're singing the same songs, and that the new wave of composition brought on by A.K. Rangin more than 40 years ago is still strong. Artos are still being sung, even though these point to contexts no longer so relevant to young people, and even though their style of singing is quite out of keeping with popular styles in South India. Even in 1991, I remember a young male musician criticizing the cut-up articulation of the artel and offering the smooth continuity of film songs as a favorable alternative. The artel you'll hear now, arguably the most famous, is used with several distinct stories and has been adopted into the instrumental repertoire for funerals. The version you'll hear shares both the story and the melody, with one recorded by the Gramophone Company of Calcutta under the auspices of the Linguistic Survey of India in 1922. As you'll see from the synopsis of the story, it describes the journey of a girl and her brother who meet three animals identified as bad omens. They return home and the girl dies. The song, as recorded on gramophone record, is clearly rehearsed and far more tidy than one finds now. I've never heard a version explicitly identifying the animals crossing the path as bad omens. Indeed, the singer will often insert the names of other animals, which suggests that the animals are not really serving as omens at all. However, the theme of the girl telling the boy that this trip is not a good idea fits with the theme of blame. In this case, she's warning her brother of what will ultimately be her own death. This is the beginning of the text of the song as it was sung in December. Unlike in the 1922 recording, but in almost every instance of this genre I've heard over 30 years, these songs are addressed to the dead person using terms of endearment, such as mother or brother, and use rhetorical expressions of futility. Here, what to say? The story starts the same way as it did a century ago, with a cat and a porcupine crossing the path. Another element of the story, normally not told, involves the girl going off into the bamboo forest to defecate. Normally, the euphemism "go outside" is used for this in Kota, although "take a poop" is perfectly acceptable as well in everyday speech. I've never heard "take a poop" used in this song. It was inserted here with a laugh, perhaps to clarify the meaning for the small children present. The girl is told not to go far off and is represented as one who doesn't listen to advice. The unsung part of the story is that she is ensorcelled or raped by a man of the dreaded Kurumba tribe while doing her business. She then comes home and again has to go outside, this time outside the pure part of the village to the place reserved for menstruation and childbirth. This may be alluding to the episode of sexual violence in the bamboo forest. Whatever the reason, the next morning, the girl Madhi is found dead at dawn in the menstrual seclusion house. Instead of saying that Madhi is dead, the song says that she left and crossed over, meaning to the world of the dead. Here's an excerpt of the song.
Apuranjare kipasukan kipasike vokere padidiya amma adurtike veta vole potike ne vovere apadidane amma madeke lade oh yeah. என்னவா அமதே.
Outside the frame of the camera, several women were weeping as Manimala sang, and everyone praised her when she finished. They were not weeping for the girl Madhi depicted in the song, but perhaps for something in themselves, touched off by the genre itself, sung so beautifully. What can we say about this poem song and its role vis-a-vis Kota as an endangered language? Sir George Grierson, the British officer in charge of the Linguistic Survey of India, recommended the documentation project in 1918, in part, quote, to form valuable records of languages which are liable to change and which in future years may be extinct, end quote. In fact, these recordings and their transcriptions have never been available to Kotas, except when I played cassette copies I'd made from an antique gramophone in the Madras Museum in 1992. So they have not directly aided the Kotas in preserving their language. Rather, the persistence of the tune and the formulaic nature of the artul have allowed and encouraged a form of transmitting stories, and in more general ways, a way to give voice to emotion that is unique to the Kota language. Let's turn now to an analogous genre sung by Wakis. Like the artul, the bulbulik is a song of loss, not a lament, and is cryptic as regards any specific turn of events. It too has strong generic conventions. Prosodically, the bulbulik is well defined as poetry, in that it almost always consists of 3 lines that more or less conform to an ABA rhyme scheme. They are often composed of 7 syllables per line, which work well in the context of the bulbulik standard tune. The first line of a bulbulik is an image with wide scope for interpretation. The next 2 lines allude to a person and describe some kind of action. The singer is said to voice the lament of the bulbul, the nightingale, which is associated with love, magic, and loss in many parts of the world. Some bulbuliks are performed with a refrain that says, "I, the nightingale, lament to you." I suspect that this practice arose and was solidified during the Soviet period. Singers vary in the degree to which they compose their own bulbuliks. Often the frame of a long-standing bulbulik is made personal with the name of a loved one and becomes, for all intents and purposes, the composition of the singer. In the following example, the singer sitting in the middle, Kobulmoda Jabova, leads what she identifies as her own bulbulik. But in textual terms, it is only the insertion of her brother Khush John's name that makes it her own.
هر بار کی خشیان خنه یفت باران رم جروی هفت باران رم بلبل تنالمه
Here, the opening line refers to beads, i.e. rosary beads, with the diminutive ak, which meaning something like dear little beads. Then it says 1 and 2. From this, we imagine a singer counting beads in the way one would count prayers, passing the moments contemplatively while remembering somebody who is far off or dead. In the second line, she uses the wachiized Tajik word for each time, arbor. This provides alliterative and internal rhyme with aft boron in line 3. This is also wachiized Tajik, meaning literally 7 rains. In the bulbulik, it's a metaphor for heavy crying. Elol is not part of the bulbulik structure per se. It's in every bulbulik, even if the subject is not the brother. The story behind Kobulma's song concerns the tragic death of her brother, Khushwat Shah. He'd lent money to a village mate who, after many excuses, finally agreed to repay him. The debtor invited Khushwat Shah to wait in a small room of his house. He got a gun, a plastic bag, and an axe, distributed fireworks to the neighborhood children, and connected a live electrical wire to the door latch. Once inside, masked by the sounds of the fireworks, he shot Khushwat Shah. The injured man staggered towards him, grabbed the live wire, and died. The murderer chopped him into pieces and dropped the bag pieces of his dismembered body into a hole he had dug ostensibly for an apricot tree. Then he planted a tree. For some time, the killer claimed that Khushwat Shah had gone to Afghanistan, but he was eventually forced to confess to the murderer. This sent a wave of shock through the Wakhi community, where such violence is almost unheard of. In the context of this song, though the text of the song is hardly distinctive, the mention of Khush Shan, dear Khush, is enough for any Wakhi to recall this story and the sister's grief, any Wakhi from the area. Although Wakhis don't need to be told, I, the nightingale, lament to you, the refrain does serve to differentiate the bulbulik from any other genre, including an actual funeral lament, which is called rubai or nohagari, depending on the languages used. The funeral lament has a slightly different melody, but as we shall see, even a text and melody closer to a lament can be finalized with a bulbulik refrain, and in that sense take on the identity of a bulbulik. The ordinary poem song in Wakhi known as baid is often in the poetic form of the Persian ghazal, but it can also take other forms, such as this one in quatrains. The first stanza is the refrain, and the second is a verse incorporating the bulbulik text used above. So you see, tisat ki iwat bui, arbor tau yod saram, that part. And then it has an additional line that ties the object of the poem to the beloved represented in the refrain. The repeated Wakhi term yiram means literally to circumambulate, but has the figurative meanings provided here. The style of rendition, the addition of a line, and the finalization with this refrain serves to mark this as a baid and not a bulbulik, despite their shared verse context. Baid singers incorporate bulbulik texts into their songs in several ways, often spontaneously. Oh, sorry, I'm supposed to play this one. Let's return to our earlier bulbulik singers to see a different strategy for creativity. Kobulma addresses this poem song to Khushjan's daughter, Nishasta Jan. The style and structure of this song are not those of a bulbulik. It is only a bulbulik by virtue of the fact that the singer names it as such, and the group finalizes it with a bulbulik refrain. Rather than being open-ended, as in the typical bulbulik, this text alludes to a particular event and names individuals. It is 5 lines rather than 3, and the melody approximates quatrain laments sung at Wahi funerals. Pay attention specifically to the drop in pitch on the syllable lol, marked in red. Related to this, whereas the syllable count hovers around the 7 per line that you'd find in a bulbulik, the syllables come out in a burst rather than in the evenly spaced 3+4 structure of syllables as sung in standard bulbuliks. The first line begins more or less in keeping with the bulbulik tune, and then it changes. So if I were to sing it straight, it would be like this. So the 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 4. Echus Johnny Nozion. Echus Johnny Nozion. Something like that is what it would be. So keep that in your mind, and then you'll hear it almost starts like that, but then it changes and the syllables get all come out rather quickly in the subsequent lines.
Dışmatavin osti yani şasajon vitayro شیرین تجا ایوه چشمجی مکتب رو مكتب
Kobulma tells the story. In this bulbulik, I sang that my brother used to take his daughter to school because his children were the light of his life. People would say, "But you have no son, only 3 daughters." To which he'd reply, "To me, my daughters are my sons," adding jokingly, "I'll make my sons march and send them to the army. When I take my daughter to school, I'll invite all my relatives and make a parade." The enemy killed him, and he didn't realize his wish, but my brothers and I carried out his wishes. We brought her to school in a parade. But no matter how much we danced and had fun, the girl didn't smile even for a moment. Her father's taste was not there. No matter how much we cajoled her, she didn't laugh even once. She was looking around asking, "Where's my father?" The second line of this bulbulik refers to the killer who dashed the hopes of Khushjan. The child, Nishasta John, is shocked at the events and looks for her dad, wondering who will take her to school. I should point out that a vigorous tradition of contemporary Baid composition, spurred in part by Qurban Shah, does not draw from the bulbulik, but this does not diminish the significance of the bulbulik as a site in which Wahi language and emotion crystallize into a single form. Qurban Shah and others, however, question whether the bulbuliks handed down from generations past have heartfelt meaning for those who sing them today. In Kurbon Shaw's view, life conditions have improved to such an extent that singers cannot draw from hardship in their everyday lives to generate true performances. Bulbuliks become simply songs. Kurbon Shaw claims never to have heard a bulbulik as it's meant to be sung, from the bottom of one's heart. We should be skeptical of such a claim, for how could Kurbon Shaw know the real bulbulik if he has never heard it? Still, his claim rings true as we see young girls don their folkloric white satiny costumes and perform bulbulik on stage, drawing out the self-conscious refrain, "I, the bulbulik, lament to you," or "I, the bulbul." But then there are singers like Kobulmor, who will never be able to rid herself of grief, no matter how much she sings. The mere insertion of her brother's name into the most common of bulbuliks renders it intensely personal. What light do these examples shed on the poem song? Tajik and Afghan musicians commonly use the Persian term kolab, meaning model or mold, in reference to the form of a melody, piece, poem, and so forth. The kolab could be the basic note structure of a melody, including the repeating strumming pattern if it's played on a musical instrument, and it can mean the prosodic rules of a poem. The way it's often discussed is, once you've mastered the kolab, it's easy to pour in personalized content, whether that means ornamentation, the correct placement of text within the rhythmic structure, or the invention of new text. The use of kolab thus has an implication for expression. Mastery of form allows one to focus on the message itself, as well as the delivery of the message, even if the message is melody without words. The kolab itself determines, or at least is supposed to determine, the emotional moral framework for the content. Thus, musicians will say that such and such text is compatible with such and such a musical setting and not compatible with another. But in other cases, the kolab can shift our understanding of the message, as it did in the case of the bulbulik text framed within a baid, focusing on a worldly beloved. The poem song is one in which the kolab and the textual meaning it contains are in harmony. An effective poem song and performance requires something extra. This may involve overt facial gestures or sounds of emotion, imagining treatment of the melody or rhythm, but it may also involve something external to the performance itself, the knowledge of context and narrative that extends beyond the words of the song. I'd like to close by considering the role of form, call it kolab or by any other term, in relation to the question of endangered languages. The 14th century Tunisian philosopher-historian Ibn Khaldun, often credited as the first sociologist and anthropologist, frequently invokes the image of a loom and a mold in his famous work, the Muqaddimah. Uslub, or method, Khaldun writes, is used to refer to a mental form for metrical word combinations, which is universal in the sense of conforming with any particular word combination. This form is abstracted by the mind from the most prominent individual word combinations and given a place in the imagination comparable to a mold or loom. Word combinations that Arabs consider proper are then selected and packed into that form, just as a builder does with the mold or the weaver with the loom. Eventually, the mold is sufficiently widened to admit the word combinations that fully express what one wants to express. While it would be a mistake that people who speak endangered languages lack theories of prosody in music, it's likely that such theories are not articulated in the explicit forms we find in the codified traditions of Tamil, Sanskrit, Persian, and Arabic, or the methods of singing, the classical music of South India, Iran, and Iraq. Nevertheless, highly complex musical poetic traditions exist even in these languages, with a small number of speakers. Take, for instance, the Todas of the Nilgiris, a tribal group of about 12,000 who live in small hamlets alongside their Kota neighbors. Murray Emino wrote a 1,000-page book on their verbal art, which continues to occupy the minds of contemporary linguists such as Peri Bhaskar Rao. The methods for composing such poetry are not given in grammars or dictionaries, but are rather imbibed through existing models, which become looms or molds in Khaldun's terms. The key here, I think, is the idea that the molds can be sufficiently widened to accommodate what the poet wishes to express. The cases we've seen are meant to be examples of possibilities rather than the basis for generalization. I see the poem song as a kind of mutually implicating mold. The musical side shapes without fully determining the kinds of verbal sounds the poem song contains, and also helps the imagination fill in what might not be said explicitly. The textual side, through parallelisms, juxtaposition, terseness, or prolixity, can work within, create, whereas in the last case, break the usual molds. The fact that in many traditions, originary versions of any particular text or melody cannot be recovered or never existed in the first place in no way weakens the elusive mold. Rather, it leaves a great responsibility with the builder every time she builds, the weaver every time he weaves, rather than with the creator of the loom, the mold, or any product from them. Changing life experiences of singers in the modern world can perhaps turn the woven products from the looms into lifeless objects, but we can't be sure of it. While new experiences continue to stimulate poet-singers to press their speech into molds they have abstracted from the modern media, from musical poetic exemplars in other languages, and from as yet unrealized possibilities in their own languages, they enrich their languages and inspire others to do so as well. Ibn Khaldun wrote, "The desire to press speech into the molds of poetry sharpens the mind." Perhaps we can say, the desire to press poem songs into action sharpens the language. Thank you very much.
Oh, thank you very much. We appreciate that. I just wanted to take the time to ask everyone if they have questions to please submit them through the Zoom group chat box so that way everyone can read it. And I, of course, will read it out loud just in case someone might have missed it. Are there any questions that we want to ask? Please do so. And maybe, Sadaf, if you'd like to start off, that would be helpful.
I just wanted to thank you very much, Richard, for a very lively presentation in these times. I really enjoyed your presentation, and this is something that I've been interested in and looking at through my own language. Yeah, I would like to open the door for questions or comments. So if anyone has questions, should they be directing to you, Ava? We cannot hear you.
Just submit that in the box. I'll be happy, to read it, unless, of course, Dr. Wolf reads it for himself.
Oh, okay.
That way we can have everyone, read it as we go.
Yeah, I don't see anything in the chat right now, so.
Okay. Yeah, in the meantime, I have a comment while we have some people writing their questions. Yeah, I worked on Kashmiri oral traditions, and you mentioned and the memorization, and then how we can make sure that the original text is preserved. So many cultures, they use these fixed melodies or fixed templates where they continue to write in the same, and I guess that's one way to kind of keep the oral traditions memorized and passing them on. I find it really fascinating how people do that, and I just had that comment. Yeah. Did we have any questions so far?
I have one that I'll ask out loud. Thanks so much, Richard, for a wonderful presentation. On that subject of common melodies that are used, you mentioned just a little bit at the end about this bulbulik melody being used in kind of folkloric space where it doesn't have the mood of sadness and lament, although presumably it might have some of the lyrics. If you do have cases like you mentioned in the Waki case, there are melodies that are detached from the poetry and then used for completely different songs. Will the melody keep the name the way, for example, in Punjab, the Mirza pattern of melody and rhythm is still called Mirza, even if you're not using it to tell the story of Mirza? People consider it a Mirza song just because that melody is from that story originally.
Yes. Well, the Bulbulik melody is not used anywhere else.
Okay.
And on the stage, it mimics the sad whatever, but it just is not believable. And also, some people say that some Bulbuliks aren't sad. There's also some disagreement. Like, it depends on what the text is. It's the prototypical Wahi genre. It's their 3-line thing. And whether the other question can be, is it still a Bulbulik if it's not sung in that framework? So I found an instance of plenty of times Bulbuliks are reworked, like we just saw. But I did find a specific instance of a Pakistani musician who found a notebook with a Bulbulik written in Persian, and it was titled Bulbulik, and then he composed a song out of it. And so the term Bulbulik is used in Pakistan for certain kinds of things, but actually the practice of singing, as far as I know, it's completely died out. Like, they think that they know it, and when I've shown people what it's like in Afghanistan and Tajikistan, they say that they haven't seen it. The Wahis in Tajikistan, in Pakistan. Now, as for the broader question about a term that's associated with a particular kind of text being used for other things, there's a very slippery genre named falak, which prototypically is used for quatrain singing, and there's more than one style of doing it. And that style can be applied to texts that are not appropriate to it. But everyone still would recognize it as a falak style and call it, they may not call it a falak, but they would recognize it as basically falak in terms of musical style.
I'm curious, do you know what the meaning of the word falak is?
Yeah, it means like destiny.
Oh, I see.
Yeah, the sky.
Yeah, I guess we have 2 questions. Did you want to read them, Ava?
Yes, so Richard, the first question is from Jessica. Have any communities shown interest in keeping or displaying the recordings of the music that you've done?
Oh, yes, absolutely. So I share these things with them, and also, well, so there's a Wahi, there are a number of Pamiri and Wahi like Facebook pages, groups, and there are some, I just discovered the other day, I was looking Bulbulik up through Russian media, and I found a bunch of people had nabbed some of my videos and put them on their own music and folklore pages on their Russian social media sites. So yes, they're very interested. And that Afghan video you saw of the dancing, I put it up on Facebook, and I got like 40,000 likes on it and lots of shares. And people were really excited about it, and a lot of comments about how happy they were that I was showing Afghanistan in a good light. But in that part of Afghanistan, they're also, it's very vulnerable, and there are some things I shouldn't share because they're also private. And I mean, they don't have access to the internet. They don't even have phones most of the places, or access to phone signal. They get it from Tajikistan when they're near the border.
Yeah, we have one more. Can I read that? Yeah, we have one more.
Yes, please.
Yeah, from Laura McPherson. She says, thank you so much for this fascinating talk. I assume there are high rates of bilingualism in both of these communities and access to larger musical traditions. In modern compositions, do you see more use of Tamil or Tajik words with traditional melodies, or the use of Kota or Wahi words with contemporary music or other styles, or do language and musical traditions always correspond?
No, the language and musical traditions don't always correspond. So even in the examples we saw here, there were a bunch of Tajik words in the very traditional Wahi song, and there were there's plenty of Tamil that you find in Kota songs, and there are Kota songs that are sung largely in Kota that are in the style of local devotional songs. So everything is all overlapping and mixed up. There's nothing that's pure. And sometimes people wouldn't even know what is pure. That's why I brought up the word mamul. I'll tell you one more thing that's like that I like very much. So in South India, they call the metal lipped cup that you drink out of in order not to touch to your lips, be able to pour water or whatever into your mouth, they call it tumbler. So I was mentioning this to my Kota research assistant's mother, and she said, oh yeah, in Tamil they use a lot of English. What we call it gilasu.
That's funny.
Okay, it looks like there are two more questions, but I did want to ask, is there a hard stop or can we keep going with the question?
Oh, keep going, absolutely.
We can keep going. And if people want to leave, they can after like a 5-minute. But yeah, we can keep going until Richard is going.
Yeah,
like
no, I'm fine. I'm fine.
Until 2:15. Yeah, it was Vivek actually. He says, he was asking whether the word, the Wahi genre term used by share the cognate with Sindhi bite. And I guess the bite in Sindhi itself might be
it's from
borrowed word, Arabic word bite, which means a couplet, right? Or a quatrain?
It can be a line or a half line. It's all from Arabic. I cut that part out of the paper, but it's an interesting thing here that the word itself refers to a unit of language, but it absolutely is sung. It's not a bite. Like the thing on the paper is not a bite. It's a thing that's sung. So it's the sung form that is a bite.
You're talking of the lament, the genre of lamenting. I don't know if you have looked at the Marsiya traditions. In Kashmir, we have this I'm not sure if it's unique to Kashmir, but I haven't come across any so far. It's like it's like ritual lamenting, where people use both narrative storytelling style, which is kind of sung, but in a very different way, and it has kind of at intervals there's a different, it switches genre, and so it goes back and forth between narrative and musical poetic. It's called Marsiya and Noha in Kashmir, but it's kind of adopted, but they have changed it in their own way.
But is it different from Marsiya and Noha in Urdu and Punjabi?
Yes, it's different. Yeah, it's different.
So, but is the Noha?
What they call?
Is it still like metered? The Noha like?
Noha is metered. In Marsiya, you have both metered and unmetered.
Musically or poetically? Is it poetically all metered, or is it the description?
It is musical, but I don't think it's kind of narrative performance, like a narrative performance, and with small sections of musical fixed poetic like poetry, but in between that's like sung at, not sung, performed at, they don't use the word singing, performed at intervals, like at short intervals, long narrative, and then short
So
kind of poetry.
that's really very common in Central Asia and West Asia and parts of India also. Not in the Marsiya, as far as I know, but
but in Kashmir they call it Marsiya, which is very interesting.
Yeah. No. What I mean is the idea of, usually the idea is that you've got some portion that needs some explanation. So the narrative part of it gives you kind of the full story, and then it goes back to the song for one particular moment in it, or because the text itself is, sometimes this is done in multiple languages. So it also may be that the audience is not fluent in the language of the poetry. But I haven't heard of this done with Marsiya. You do have Marsiya also in Tajikistan and Afghanistan. The things that are called Marsiya are different in the places. And
that's true.
In Kashmir, are the Marsiyas, are they just general laments, or are they Marsiyas relating to the martyrdom of
yeah, they are related
thing?
to the martyrs of Karbala.
Okay.
We have a comment and then followed by a question. So a comment by Javed Iqbal. He says, the Wakhi speaking community of Northern Pakistan are working to preserve their music through an NGO called Bulbulik. And then we have a question from Yang Chen. I noticed the Bigali example had instruments like the bowed string instrument and frame drum, but Bulbulik is only sung. What are the contexts for which instruments are used with these poem songs?
Okay, so the Bigali example is just an instrumental, and I was only showing it to talk about how the melodies sometimes take on a life of their own, but they may have been associated originally with a particular language. So in this case, it's maybe Shina speakers know some particular song that's associated with that melody, but it's become generalized, and it's just melodic. Sometimes the melodies pass from one language to another, in which case it's taken up and sung. So that answers one aspect of it. The Bulbulik, it's an interesting question about playing it on an instrument. Sometimes men sing it, especially in Afghanistan, like during a wedding. They sing it like as entertainment, it's like sing on demand. They'll sing talaks and bulbuliks and other things, because women don't come out and sing in public. So men have become very adept also at singing bulbuliks. And sometimes they'll accompany themselves with a string instrument. So that's a context in which an instrument would be used with the song. I think beyond that, I would just be going into lots of examples.
Yeah, we have several other questions actually. Amy is asking a question. Does the notion of poetic meter or kavya chand found in, for example, Urdu ghazal, found in Wakhi or Kota in songs?
No. So there's poetic meter in Persian, but Kota does not have phonemic distinction between long and short vowels. And also the poetic meter that you have in Persian was imported from Arabic. So that's something, and Wakhi developed completely separately. So there's no phonemic distinction between long and short vowels. There is not poetic meter that's recognized. However, as I mentioned, the Bulbulik tends to be in a syllabic meter, which means the same number of syllables in each line. And that's fostered by the structure of the tune. So da 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 da. And then you have words around the sides that are always there, but like the core text tends to be in this seven
Okay, so
syllables.
is my voice coming now? Is my voice
Yes.
coming now?
Yes.
Hello?
Yes, we can hear
Yeah,
you,
so,
Amy.
Yeah, because I made typos when I was writing. So my question was, I'm curious about the connection of the poetic meter or even the rhythm of a language and how that is connected to the rhythm in music, in songs. So that's kind of that's what I was meaning. And this notion of chand, that it's a word used in Hindustani music. And some folk musicians in North India understand it and some don't. And I was wondering if, in particular, Waki people, the Burushaski musicians that I have been corresponding with, he didn't know that term.
Well, the term is a Sanskrit term for meter.
Chand,
and it's actually used in Tamil. It
Okay.
refers to the
Interesting.
to the metrical frame that's created by the syllables that you find in Tamil folk songs, like ta na 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 na. That's called the chandas. That's the chandam. Yeah.
Okay.
Interestingly, also
Chandam.
chand is also used in Kashmiri, Sufiana chand.
So it's very
Chand,
common, but
yeah, and so,
but it's not relevant at all to Wahi or Kota.
Yeah.
Well, that's not true. It's not. There isn't meter in either of those languages, but in Kota,
I'm sorry, you just broke up. Can you repeat that? Yeah.
there is not poetic meter in Wahi or Kota, but there are Kota songs that will start with a sequence of syllables sung to the tune that's coming forward that sets up the frame of what the tune is going to be. That's very, very, very common. And so in effect, it's doing the same thing as the chandam in Tamil. However, when you look at...
I mean, it's even a groove. I mean,
Amy, we cannot hear you clearly. We'll move to the next question. We have a set of other questions.
no, I couldn't
I'm sorry.
I couldn't hear Richard clearly either. Let me see.
Yeah, we're having problems with your audio. I guess we'll move on to the next question. So there's a question from College of Information. The term classical is used for very specific...
It disconnected, it dropped. Okay, I'm back. The connection disconnected. Okay, yeah.
I was moving to the next question, Amy, I'm sorry.
Sure.
Yeah. So they're asking whether the term classical and folk are they different types, or the terms classical, folk, and tribal and endangered. What would you call it, like the types of music?
So these are terms that are used locally for different kinds of things. Classical is a term that would be used either in English or in some local language to refer to things like Carnatic music in South India, Hindustani music in North India, the Shashmakam in Tajikistan and Uzbekistan. You could also use classical to refer to certain kinds of poetic traditions, or to the systems of codifying these poetic systems. So one talks about classical texts or classical Sanskrit meters, that kind of thing. Folk is particularly tricky, and I'll give you an example of how the translation of the term has changed in Tajikistan. So the term that you'd use for for folk is khalq in Tajik. And it's folk in the sense of, the people, the folk, all the people. So in Soviet times, they were trying to promote the individual musical and language traditions of the peoples of Central Asia. And so the music of the people, like of any particular group, it's the music of the khalq, it's khalqi, folk music. And so when one of the early publications of what we now call classical shashmakam music from Tajikistan and Uzbekistan was called folk music, was called khalq. Now that would be called classiki, and it would not, the difference between like high and low was not always implied by that term. And so it's always a tricky kind of situation.
Mm-hmm.
And there have been a number of scholars of South Asia who've talked about the problems of separating these things. The question of what tribal music is also a problem. It's connected to the problem of what constitutes a tribe. And there's no absolute definition. It's a government imposed category. Yeah.
Okay, we'll take just the two more questions that are there, and we'll stop after that because of the time. We have another meeting after that. So there was one more question. Have you heard the music of Velar Christians? Some sounds like what you played for Kota. And the last question was, what are the ways that language documenters can partner with ethnomusicologists?
Right.
I guess.
So no, I haven't heard the music of Velar Christians. I'm surprised that they would be different. There is music. I would say where is that from? You can email me about that. There are throughout the Nilgiris, to the untrained ear, the music of all the tribal groups that use double reeds and drums is very similar in structure. But singing wise, I'm not sure. It depends on which thing you're talking about, whether it was the artel or the modern song. What are the ways that language documenters can partner with ethnomusicologists? One-on-one? I don't know how to answer that.
Today is the first day. We've started. We're kind of mute. What happened?
I'm still here.
Okay, I mean, yeah, sure.
Yeah, that's. I don't have a better answer than that.
Maybe Vivek can say a couple words.
Yeah, thank you so much, Richard, for sharing this talk. I mean, these are such rare genres to be able to hear. And then, of course, to be able to hear them with the guidance of both the cultural, linguistic context and to have the musical forms explained so clearly was really a treat. So thank you so much to the College of Information for organizing this. Thank you very much to Adam for arranging for the technological side of this call and managing all of us. And of course, to Sadaf and all of her colleagues in linguistics for sponsoring this. And thank you so much, Richard. We hope to have you on campus with us eventually so we can share some of these richer discussions in person. And thank you all for tuning in. Who knows, this might be a thing that we keep doing, so maybe we'll see more of you in this format soon.
Thank you, Vivek, for introducing me with Richard. And I really like the kind of research that I was very excited to know about his work and the connections between my work and his work. I was already looking at the Burshasky videos we have recorded and the correspondence between them, some of the music and the dance forms that I looked at reminded me of some of my work. And I would like to continue to stay in touch with Richard, and hopefully we'll learn something from each other.
Terrific. No, I totally look forward to it. I'm so grateful for the chance to do this.
And thank you everybody for joining us. I was a little nervous because I'm not really great at technology, and so it's my first ever Zoom kind of joint presentation that I have hosted here. So thank you very much, and look forward to see you all again. And I want a little announcement because we were supposed to have a musical performance today, and that was also canceled because all the events were canceled. But hopefully we're going to have live streaming maybe this Sunday. We are going to send an email about that. We're hoping to do that from home.
Yes, and I did. We will send that out on behalf of the college as well. But I did want to ask, Richard, is there any place where we can follow your work, whether that be on social media or your website, and we can leave that information along with this video?
Oh, yeah. Well, you know, I don't know whether I want to put it up on my website. We can be in touch by email. Let's see. Okay.
Okay.
Yeah,
okay.
and I'll see. But I do have I do have a website, richardkwolf.com, as well as a Facebook page, which sometimes I'm active on. Not for the last couple of years, though.
All right, everybody, have a wonderful weekend, and we look forward to be in touch and see you again. Thank you, Eva and Adam.
Yeah,
I will let you wrap up the disconnect and all. Thank you.
Okay, bye.
Bye.